Thank you everyone today. My name is Fikayomi Olanbiwoninu, and I am a Nigerian and also a master's student in international relations and cultural diplomacy at the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy. And my master's thesis, or the master's thesis I'm about to finish in, goes along with the topic of, is Africa a pawn in China's growing hegemony and economic influence? So as we may all know, Africa and China have been large trade partners for over the last period of 10 years. And the bilateral trade between both countries keeps expanding and keeps growing forward. And as a Nigerian, as an African myself, I've come to the conclusion or try to really understand that what are really the strings attached and the amount of economic influence or the trade relations that we establish with China, does it actually lead to local economic development and generate a transfer of skills and technology within Africans? Which is China's trade and investment in Africa going to lead to our economic potential being fulfilled? So I would like to start with, because I'm from Nigeria, one of the most recent projects that China constructed in Nigeria is the Lagos-Ibadan Railway, which was constructed for an estimated of 1.5 billion and really expanded the debt level of my country, Nigeria. First of all, this railway connects Ibadan, one of the largest cities in Nigeria, to the economic capital of Africa, Lagos, and it does it in under 4 hours. So you might be thinking that, why hasn't this approach been tried by the Nigerian government already? Like, why wouldn't there be a proper railway system to connect us? And that is because the Nigerian government actually did do this, and they provided a highway connecting Ibadan and the economic capital, Lagos, together. And this highway normally would take you 2 hours. But because in Lagos, there is a population of over 200 million people, it would obviously lead to traffic congestion, and thus the highway is practically impossible for people to move around. In the third picture there, that is the former president of Nigeria, Muhammad Buhari. You can see him there, and that is to show you how important this infrastructural development was for Nigeria and how it helped to advance economic development. So in the next slide, we have obviously expanded on this, that the level of trade between China and Africa keeps growing forward, and China keeps being Africa's largest bilateral trading partner. But there's a net negative to that amount of trade between both of them, which is that Africa is mainly a natural resource exporting country, and China is a manufacturing powerhouse of the whole wide world, which means that African countries send their raw materials to China for it to get processed, and China sends it back as finished goods. Now, obviously, the problem with this is it is kind of like colonialism with extra steps, because as we all know what colonialism was, it was Africans sending our natural resources to our former colonial masters, and them harboring it for their own economic needs. But the reason why Africa needs China is because we need the infrastructural development. For Africa's economy to reach its economic potential, it needs infrastructural development. And China offers net-free loans, concessional loans, and loans with really very good payback rates for Africans. And this is something that the West is not really offering to Africa at the current time. And because of the high population growth, the only way to sustain the economic development is to continue to invest in our infrastructure. And the main reason why I've discovered that a lot of African countries like to partner with China is because of the shared anti-colonial history between Africa and China. And there's an important fact to note in the literature review of my master's thesis is that you can see Africa currently as China of 50 years ago. Because China of 50 years ago was not the superpower it was right now. It had a very high level, it had a high population growth, it was not industrialized, its economy was nowhere to be called in the world. And that is why China is really trying to invest in Africa, or that is why China is seeing Africa as a project that it can help build up. But there are two varying views in which you can look at this. You can look at this as China being a neo-colonialist exploiter, which is with the trade relations, with the high exportation of finished goods and the importation of natural resources from Africa. Or you can see China as being a benign supporter for Africa's development. And this was really two conflicting views I tried to really understand in my master's thesis. Because on one side, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, China supplied a lot of FFP2 masks, ventilators, a lot of health diplomacy, and China did all of this for free to Africa. And aside from that, they also helped us to construct the African Union headquarters. The upcoming ECOWAS headquarters, China has promised to bankroll it for us. The AFCON 2024 that will be held in Ivory Coast, China is hoping to build a stadium for there. So there are clearly some conflicting views because on one side, China is helping our infrastructural development, but on the other side, they are also kind of exploiting Africa. And a major fact in which I was able to really understand in my thesis was that most of these infrastructural projects being built, the main driving factor that they were being built was because of the low wage rate in Africa. For example, when I worked with the Ogun State government, one of our selling points was that we pay $3 per day. That's the daily wage rate, and that is really, really cheap. And there is no reason why any country or any economy would not take advantage of you if you are advertising yourself as the main selling point is that you offer $3 per day. And to properly understand this complexity, or to really understand the complexity of China and Africa's relationship, I decided to give myself 2 research questions to analyze for my topic. And those research questions are, get there. Is China's growing economic influence exploitative, or is it conducive for economic development in Nigeria? And I was going to do this by really not only looking at the GDP or looking at the very clear factors of economic growth. I was going to do this by observing the Human Development Index, the Poverty Index, the Unemployment Index, and the Gini coefficient, the level of equality. That because of the high level of trade in which they have, surely Africa's economy is growing, but are we really fulfilling our economic development? Are people's lives getting better? Is the local population really benefiting from this? Or is it only the African political elite that keep expanding their own material wealth or their own selfish wealth? And the next question was, is China's economic development going to facilitate an authoritarian shift in Africa? And I decided to pick this question because in 2020, because of some things that happened on Twitter, my country, Nigeria, banned Twitter for over 8 months. And clearly, the only country that I know that bans Twitter or bans social media is China. And not only this, in the election in which Bobby Wine was supposed to probably win, he was under house arrest, and the only way he was able to do this was the surveillance technology in which China gave the African country. And clearly, I really wanted to understand that since there are really strings attached in this relationship, that what is the determinant of Africans' democracy in the future? And another fact I would like to point out is that there are 54 countries in Africa, but only one country recognizes Taiwan as the diplomatic state of China, which is because China sees itself as China, and Taiwan also sees itself as Taiwan. But African countries have to pick one, and out of the whole of Africa, only Eswatini or Swaziland recognizes Taiwan, with the other African countries deciding to see China as the legitimate diplomatic state of China. So to do this, I decided to not look at Africa as a single story, and decided to focus on 2 countries in Africa, Kenya and Libya. And there are 3 main reasons why I decided to focus on these countries. 1, Kenya is Africa's largest importer from China. Libya is Africa's largest exporter to China. Kenya isn't really a natural resource-rich state. So I really wanted to understand what was the relation with China and Kenya, because China, the narrative I've been told to understand is that China is here to exploit your natural resources. So then why does Kenya then import a lot from China? And for Libya, I really wanted to understand what was driving the need for the economic interaction between the both of them. And aside from that, there are some other factors, with Kenya being semi-democratic state, but Libya, ever since the death of Saddam Gaddafi, they have been under a provisional government. So you cannot really call them autocratic, or you can call them democratic, but they lean slightly towards autocracy. And because they have very high level of engagement with China. So some important facts, both of these economies, or the main important fact is that both of these economies, based on like GDP or like the economic indicator of is a country producing more resources or is a country amassing economic wealth, Kenya and Libya are doing very good. Kenya has the seventh largest economy in Africa with a GDP of about 107 billion. Its real GDP keeps increasing and keeps expanding. In 2021, its GDP increased by 7.5%. However, Kenya still faces the main, what I will call sustainable development challenges that other African states face. There is a high level of unemployment rate. 66.5% of its population lives below $3.2 in a day, and it has a human development index of 0.5%. So clearly, despite the amount of economic growth that Kenya is having, it is not having a fulfilling sustainable development, or is not really hitting the benchmarks of sustainable development growth. And at one point, you need to ask yourself that clearly, we Africans, we cannot eat GDP. The main thing that really matters to us is if the local development, or if there is local unemployment, if there is like local employment and local transfer of skills and technology within the country. So I decided to, for example, Kenya has the largest infrastructural construction ever facilitated by China, and that is the standard gauge railway, which costed an estimated 5 billion, and really put Kenya in a lot of debt to China. The railway system, it ensures for faster transportation, it ensures for quick move of goods and services, and it did increase Kenya's economic growth by 1.5%, and it did create 46,000 jobs for local residents. But out of those 46,000 jobs, most of the high-paying jobs, or most of the jobs that would actually lead to further economic growth, were given to the Chinese. They did not employ local Kenyans to take the positions of the people that constructed the railway or the people that maintained the trains. Most of these 46,000 jobs were actually the construction workers that built the railway system. And that is to show you that there is no transfer of skills and technology. China comes to Kenya, China brings its own people to construct a railway system for Kenya, but China does not give us the fruit to be able to replicate this infrastructural development. And yeah, this just shows you that the amount of debt that Kenya has amassed because of the infrastructural development. And most of these problems is because of the African government. For example, President Kenyatta actually believed that more and more infrastructural development will lead to economic growth. But that is not really the case. To sustain economic growth, the local population themselves needs to be empowered. And it's not the amount of infrastructural development you have. In the future, it would lead to economic growth, but it is not the fastest way to get there. Now, on focusing on Libya, Libya also has it also really has like a very good GDP. It holds the largest oil reserves. It has the largest oil reserves in the world, and it keeps a very steady relationship with China. But however, Libya also faces from the sustainable development goal challenges that I've mentioned before. It has a very high unemployment rate. Its people live below the poverty line, and there is very high inequality within Libya. And if we know, there is also like ongoing civil crisis, and Libya has not really fixed its political or civil unrest that is happening within the country. And this is just like a further example. I picked Rwanda here because Kenya and Rwanda, they are part of the East African community. And from 2015, that was when the standard gauge railway, the most expensive infrastructural development that happened in Kenya, was being constructed. And if you can see that Kenya is the column with red, you can see that clearly there is no real boost in its economic growth. There is no real boost in its GDP. There's no real, despite the investments, despite the amount of investment that China has had, despite the amount of debt that Kenya has incurred, still its economic growth isn't up to that of Rwanda, which has built its own economic growth through proper development policies and through proper development plans for its community or for its country. Another this is just to show you the unemployment rate Libya, and how it has grown and risen despite China's level of economic investment. But yeah, this slide is to show you the amount of logistical competence that Kenya has. Sub-Saharan Africa, the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa do not have enough logistical competence to compare to Kenya. But yet, Kenya's GDP has not really grown. But yet, Kenya's people have not really seen the fruits of what it means to be an infrastructurally developed country. So, my thesis kind of puts me towards the conclusion that the people to blame are not really China, or the people to blame is not really the West, or like our colonial past. The people to blame is the role of African agency in China and Africa relations. We must be able to hold African governments accountable that these policies or these development policies that they are the ones going to go and meet China for, that how fruitful or how profitable is it for them, or how profitable is it for the African people? Because the role of the African agency in China and Africa relations matters a lot, because it is not the public that votes on the infrastructural development. It is not the public that votes on the debt to incur. It is the African government or the political elite that goes to meet China and tells them that, oh, we want a port, oh, we want a stadium, oh, come and bankroll this for us. But they are doing this with myopic eyesight, and they are not really, there's really no proper development plan in place, as they all believe that if we have a lot of infrastructural investment, we'll be able to reach our economic potential quicker. African agency matters because it is a reality that has tangible effects for the continent, and its chosen path to development would lead to proper political engagement. And to properly conclude, the most important fact that we must hold as Africans in this new reality of our increasing trade relations with China is that we must be able to develop proper policies that would be able to not only advance our infrastructural development, because there is no way to be an economic powerhouse or a super country without infrastructural development. But we must always ensure that the policies in which we enact with China, it must lead to a transfer of skills and technology, and not only our exploitation in the further future. Thank you very much.